We're going to stop talking real soon and watch toe meet leather and a national championship game to be decided in Atlanta on Monday night. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. Best discussion, debate, and analysis right here. Based on what? Based on your contributions, your participation. We appreciate you being here. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat, and I will get to those. Super chats are available, and they are certainly encouraged and welcomed and appreciated more than you can imagine. Ohio State, Notre Dame, I believe the official or one of the official national championship counts has Notre Dame with 11 and Ohio State with 8. We will have a good time again this offseason at the Voice of College Football, combing through each and every season in the history of college football. We did this last season or the year before, and we made it into the late 70s. We are going to do our damnedest this time around to go through from 2024 all the way back in time to reset these national championships, go through every year, but that's for a later date. All sorts of content that reminds me of to talk about here at the Voice of College Football. We've got the Ohio State channel. We got the Notre Dame channel. Check out the various clips, live streams that have been posted. Buckeyes live all over the place with both Garrison and Ryan, and then also myself with Steve Hellwagon and Tony Gerdeman. Of course, our weekly shows posted on the Ohio State channel. So tons of live streams, call-in shows, all of that on the Buckeyes channel. And then on the Notre Dame channel, and you can also catch it right here, our conversation with Brian Driscoll from Irish Breakdown just a few nights ago. That was a fun time with Brian, tracking Ohio State against Notre Dame. The Amazon links in the description section of all the videos. When you shop on Amazon, please use the link that we provide to help us grow the channel. The call-in line is there in the chat. We've also posted it on X. We would love for you to call and talk national championship game with us. Do we have to talk about the national championship game? Well, it is the penultimate eve of the national championship game, so that would be the preferred topic. However, anything on the board concerning college football, which would also include these days the transfer portal, and I believe here in the next few weeks, we will look through the transfer portal, and I am going to make some calls in regards to who's winning the transfer portal, who has made the best decisions, who has plucked up the players, and we will give you some rankings and some lists concerning the transfer portal. I have absolutely no idea who's calling me right now, even though the name's on the phone. Don't know who that is. But yes, the transfer portal. And speaking of the transfer portal and high school football recruiting every Tuesday. So we have shown up. And when I say we, I mean Leanne Herring and myself all over the place. We've been recording segments. We've been doing transfer portal updates live almost every day for a few weeks. We've nailed it down. Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Not here. Over on the recruiting channel that we've launched here at the Voice of College Football, we will be live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern time with your portal and recruiting show on the move. And then also Leanne will be providing recorded segments throughout the week when things happen. All right, let's get to it. We've got callers calling in, and we got the Real MVP stopping by. The Real, what's going on? Hello. No, we got Dr. C on the line.
Hey, how's it going, Mark?
I'm doing just fine. How are you?
I am doing well. Just watching the Chiefs Texans game right now, and there's been a lot of questionable calls, and I'm not like a conspiracy theorist, but I mean, and I wasn't going to start with that since we're talking about, but do you see potentially in the future where AI is going to play more of a role in these games being called? Because I
Well, that's
see
an easy
with the
answer.
speed of
That's
the
an easy
game.
question to answer because the answer would be yes, even though I
Mhm.
can't tell you how or why, and that's never crossed my mind. I've never thought about AI being involved, but AI is becoming involved in everything. So my easy answer would be yes.
And like robots or whatnot, because the speed of the game, and I don't believe they, I'm sure there's been a game that here or there that people say, oh, that game was fixed. I'm not a big into that, but this, because of the speed of the game, the amount of human error that happens, in critical parts of the game. What do they say? It's typically about 5 plays that determine the game. um how much, I mean, just a random question since I started it out this way. Percentage wise, what do you think the refs get it? They get a right about 80% of the time, right? Higher?
80%? I would hope
Mhm.
they do better than that. But what I don't know, Dr. C, is
Mhm.
that with the presence of instant replay, I believe that that has made the officials call the game differently because we know that they side on, for example, allowing fumbles to be called and played out because if they stop a play and call it, let's say, forward progress, or they call a runner down before they fumble, uh, then if there's a recovery that can't be enforced, and therefore I think that and this is generally understandable how they would call a game differently because they're going to put the plays in the hands of replay that they're not sure about, and so that they're going to let things play out. Like, let's say a quarterback's back to pass and he's starting to throw the ball and the ball gets knocked out of his hands, where in the past they would make a ruling and say, no, that's an incomplete pass because his arm was moving forward, and there could be all sorts of replays on TV, but it did not affect the call made on the field because they had ultimate say and the buck stopped with them. But in this day and age,
Mhm.
they don't want to make a decision that, oh, we're blowing the play dead. The arm was moving forward, and then it goes to replay. And no, it was a fumble. Well, we call the play dead, and there wasn't a clear recovery of the football because everybody stopped. So I think that they are calling the game differently. Their approach is different because they know that they got replay either to lean on. You could look at it that way, or you can look at it another way, that they've got replay to, which is kind of looking over their shoulders. So I tend to think that they're not doing quite as good a job, and part of it's not their fault or their problem, but they're just approaching it differently. You can take this analogy to a number of different industries, that if you have a safeguard, then you're going to approach your job differently than if you always have the final say and what you say sticks.
Yeah, absolutely. So going into college football, and more so than the national championship, I said, what do you think we learned from the playoff? Was there a lesson as far as from the games, um, the quality of the games? A lot of people felt, especially the first round, was uncompetitive. What did you think overall?
Well, I would agree, but I don't know that anyone was surprised by that. I certainly wasn't. I got what I anticipated in the first round, other than Tennessee playing more competitively against Ohio State. But other than that, I got what I expected. Uh, I'm 10-0 picking the games, so I haven't gotten anything really that I didn't expect from the results standpoint. The seedings have to be dealt with, and a lot of people have suggestions, and they have good suggestions, but I don't know that I've heard anybody with the ultimate suggestion that I've just said, okay, that is the way to address it, because we live in a knee-jerk reaction society. Therefore, most people's solutions to problems only deal with the problem that's been presented this particular season. And then if you apply that across the board over the course of seasons, they may not necessarily have the best answer. So too many people rush to judgment, uh, we've arrived at a place where I think the championship game participants have earned it, significantly earned it. And so I haven't seen there be any compromised path to the championship game. I've enjoyed the playoffs. I think we had two excellent semifinal games. And I think by and large, the football's been competitive. When you talk about we're going to have 11 football games being played, no one can anticipate or expect there to be 11 classic games because that's not going to be the case. I used to be more invested in the NFL than anything. You brought up the Chiefs Texans game. I didn't watch one play of it. I'm very detached to from the NFL right now, but I used to know the score of every single NFL playoff game in history. That's how much I followed the NFL. And find me the playoff season where every game was just this scintillating, exceptional game. I don't have an issue with the playoff as much as a lot of people do. I do think that there's an issue with the seeding, but I don't think it's so obviously addressed and solved by some of the opinions I hear from people and their solutions.
Well put, Mark. And you know, the one game that someone brought up was, you know, the Oregon Ohio State game. So if Oregon hadn't played in the Big Ten, and you know that game would have been played, and it was 42-17, and Oregon was in the Pac-12, people would have said Oregon didn't belong in the playoff, right? Because they got crushed. So at times, you know, these teams don't show up right on that day. Do you think that played a factor in any of these games?
Oh, where the team did not show up? One of the teams?
Yeah, well, I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
I do not believe that Ohio State is 34-0 better than Oregon on the typical game day. And I know that it didn't finish 34-0. It was 41-21, but basically the game was over at that point, and whatever the final score ended up being didn't really matter. No, there's not that much separation between Ohio State and Oregon.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and last thing, Mark. So Monday night, I think, have you made your prediction?
My prediction is out.
Oh,
it's out there. I posted a video the other day with my prediction.
Okay, I'll have to check it out. I believe the Buckeyes win, and I would say I'm about 70% sure. I just don't really see how Notre Dame can win this.
Well, you apparently do see how Notre Dame can win it because you've given them a 30% chance.
Well, I think I'm being nice. Do you feel, I feel like it's may become Notre Dame, Alabama, the last time Notre Dame was in a national championship. How do you feel about that? Do you think it could become that?
See it anywhere close to that.
No? You think it's going to be a lot closer?
That game in 2012 was the biggest blowout. I don't care what the final score was, 42-14. That was the biggest mismatch in a national championship game that I've seen.
Do you think that was more of Notre Dame just not being ready for the moment and not necessarily being outclassed? That to be that, you know, as dominated as they were?
Well, I believe
they had the whole Manti Te'o issue going on as a distraction.
I believe that these playoff games in college football have magnified. They magnify the difference between the teams. Mm-hmm. For example, LSU had 49 points, 7 touchdowns at halftime against Oklahoma. Now, LSU was great that season and put up a ton of points, but they were not beating bad SEC teams that bad. So I think the playoff in college football has been a magnifier, and it was on that night. Alabama would not beat Notre Dame that easily if that had been a regular season game. But that did not surprise me. I remember saying Alabama's going to crush them. I don't remember what score I put on it, but that was the biggest disparity I've ever seen in a national championship game.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember it. I remember it oh too well. All right, I'll let you go. Hey, last thing, it's kind of related to the Nordic, but did you ever see the Manti Te'o Netflix documentary?
I did not. And I got to say, that was what, 12 years ago, all that went down. It's very
Yeah.
odd.
Well, I think, it when it came out, it got a lot of buzz and lots of people watched it. And I think almost everyone that watches it says, hey, we owe this kid an apology.
Mm.
When you watch it,
Wow.
you will, yeah. When you watch it, you will see how it went down. And I honestly believed him. But a lot of people didn't, right? They mocked him and made fun of him.
Well, I don't owe him an apology just because I didn't say anything bad about the guy. I think stuff like that goes on all the time.
Yeah.
But and then I got to say, I forget the details of the story. It was shoved down our throats at the time, but I don't remember the details.
Yeah, well, if you get a chance, watch it. It's on Netflix. You think you know the whole story, it's gonna knock your socks off.
Mm.
It's worth the watch. I actually had a friend who's not even a sports fan. I said, "Hey, check this out," and he said his girlfriend watched it like 5 times.
Really?
Yeah,
It's that good.
it's that. I mean,
Huh.
it goes.
How long is it?
I think it's about an hour and a half.
Okay. I can sit for 90 minutes. I was going to say if it's some
Yeah.
kind of like epic 4-hour thing, then I wouldn't be able to hang with it.
No, but
Okay.
it really they go back and they show videos of the time and everything. It's actually a really interesting documentary.
Because
So
all I
anyone that
remember about it is basically he fell in love with this person and never met her. And he got, what's the term? Catfished, right?
yeah, yeah,
And that's about all I remember. And obviously he looked like a fool because then he I guess announced this on social media, or he was very upfront about this person. Because otherwise I wouldn't know how that would get out. If this was just a private matter and then he found out.
yeah. Well, what happened was like during the national championship game, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he was told that she had passed away from an illness.
Oh,
So that's why Manti Te'o was totally out of his mind during the game, right? He's thinking
that's
my
right.
girlfriend's dead, right?
Oh my word.
You may not
Okay.
want,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah, I forgot about that.
so I'm sure that distracted him during the game, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Dr. C, appreciate you being here.
Hey, reality is weirder than anything we can make up.
Absolutely. Have a good
All
one.
right. Have a good night, Mark.
Yeah, I got to say, all that Manti Te'o stuff has just left my brain. I don't remember anything about it except for this dude had an online girlfriend and he thought she was real. And he made a lot of, now what's silly. Well, after what Dr. C just told me that I shouldn't be making fun of the guy. I guess I'll hold back on what I was about to say. All right. We'll get to the next topic. Did not expect to be talking about Manti Te'o tonight. We got Adam on the line. Adam, what's going on?
Hey, Mark, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great, primarily because last night I was in Macon, Georgia, and got to see Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons play a concert. It was fantastic. But I'm thinking
Frankie
about this
Valli
Notre.
is how old now?
He is 90 years old, and I went with my girlfriend, and we were in the fourth row, and he shook our hands, and he looks every bit of 90, but he still can sing and move around, so it was pretty impressive.
It's funny that you say that because I would otherwise I know who Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons are, and I would recognize probably 10 songs because I grew up at a certain time. Not that I grew up at that point. Obviously, I came years later, but their music was still viable and popular and so forth. But I just saw a clip. You bring that up, that's funny because I had not seen the man for years and years and years and years and years. And I saw a clip circulating on social media of him on stage as a 90-year-old, and he just appeared to be completely lost. Like he was just up there to be there.
Yeah, I think those videos are a bit misleading because if you watch at least the show that I saw last night, he was with it, but he's still old and he has a great backup band to help him. But it was a pleasure hearing, December '63. I've got you under my skin. Let's hang on. Sure. I grew up in the '80s, so I was a little after that. My uncle was the drummer for the Four Seasons from 1965 to '70, so a bit of nostalgia.
Your uncle?
Yeah, Joe Cassiri was their drummer from '65 to '70. Yeah. So, but regarding this Ohio State Notre Dame game, I think it's difficult to pick. And Mike, yes, I am from New Jersey. So I thought about this today, and I was thinking, well, let me look at this from the perspective of what are the positives for Notre Dame? Well, if you look at the Ohio State offense, they scored 21 against Texas. They, of course, had the pick six, but the offense scored 21. They scored 14 at the half against Indiana. They scored 7 points after 2 quarters against Iowa, 10 against Michigan, 20 against Penn State. Notre Dame is first in pass efficiency, and they do have a strong defensive line. I suspect they're going to blitz Will Howard all night. They do have great running backs, and I think they have the intangibles. I think they are a true team that has team chemistry. Now, what are the negatives? Well, I think the first negative is the way they won against Georgia and Penn State. If you look at that Georgia game, Georgia's got it in the red zone 3 times and comes away with 3 points, 2 turnovers, 1 critical one late in the second quarter. And they allow a kickoff return for a touchdown to start the third quarter. Then against Penn State, of course, you have the Drew Aller interception, late in the game when they should have just gone to overtime. So Notre Dame has won, but they've won more because of turnovers than they have because of talent. And that brings me to my next negative, which is talent. Is the gap too big between the two teams? And we see that with the NIU loss. That suggests to me that there is a talent deficiency, and are they going to be good enough to overcome that? Now, the positives for Ohio State, of course, the defense, Caleb Downs, Jack Sawyer, and I can go down the line. The weapons on offense are numerous, and they are dangerous. They are just a complete team. Now, the negatives are I think the offense can be stopped if Notre Dame can stop the run, and I just wonder if there's any complacency with Ohio State and if they've peaked too soon. And I guess we'll see that on Monday evening. So in my view, the keys to the game are really time of possession. If Notre Dame can win that by running the ball, they may have a shot. Turnovers, of course, and the trenches as usual. But I think it's going to come down to the intangibles. It's one game. Who wants it more? I see this game more as Ohio State, Miami from 2002 than I do as Alabama, Notre Dame from 2012. I'm going with Notre Dame against my own self-interest, 20-17.
So I expected when you started the analysis to go the Notre Dame route. Then when you started to lay out the pros and cons, I thought, well, this is weighing heavily in Ohio State's favor. But then you surprised me with the finish there.
Yeah. Okay, so my head tells me Ohio State's clearly better. My heart tells me that this team has those intangibles that in one game can be enough if things go their way, such as with turnovers and time of possession, that can bring them over the top. And I can't put my finger on what it is about championship teams that make them so special, but I think they have that it factor. Now, is it possible Ohio State's going to blow them out? Certainly. Will Notre Dame blow Ohio State out? No. But I think when I look at all of the factors, Ohio State is vulnerable if you can stop the run. And if they turn the ball over and Notre Dame hangs in there, I think they could pull it out in the fourth quarter. But, of course, I could be wrong, and we'll certainly see.
Now, it probably benefits Ohio State to a certain degree that they did not blow out Texas this last game. They were pushed to the hilt, and therefore they didn't breeze through another game and show up not tested in this game. They had to play under pressure, and they stood up to the challenge, and they made the plays that they needed to make, albeit in a very short period of time. It's not like they played this pressure cooker game from minute one all the way through. They had some game control, not a huge amount, but they were always in front. And then Texas is on the brink of catching them at the end. And of course, they make a couple just game-changing plays at the end to turn it back on Texas. Now, in terms of Georgia not scoring in the red zone against Notre Dame, you mentioned 3 points on 3 red zone trips. Now, I remember they hit the shot to Arian Smith down the field, and they had to settle for a field goal on that particular play. I don't remember the other 2 trips in the red zone for Georgia.
It was a fumble and a 4th down that they did not convert.
Okay. So when you say, and you enter the luck factor into the conversation, I'm about 50% there with you, because it's my observation that turnovers are sometimes a byproduct of great play. Having a hustling defense, of course, just making remarkable plays on the ball. A cornerback who reads a coverage, reads a pattern, and breaks off his coverage and breaks for the ball and makes a great play. A batted ball by a defensive lineman who wasn't just happened to be throwing his hands in the air, but like we've seen with the Ohio State defensive linemen in recent weeks, this is a skill set that they have. A strip sack like the Notre Dame player, R.J. Oben, had on Gunnar Stockton, where he intentionally, he just whips the left tackle, comes around, intentionally strips the ball out of his hands. So I think roughly half of fumbles and interceptions are skill plays, and the other half are somewhat random.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that another factor is going to be the red zone. How is Notre Dame's defense? Can they stop Ohio State in the red zone and limit them to field goals? But when I look at the history of college football and sports generally, you see major upsets. I remember when Florida State defeated Florida in Tallahassee, and then in the national championship got smoked. I think it was 55-10. I remember in 2002, I was with my best friend, and we were watching the Miami-Ohio State game, and Miami was more talented, but Ohio State had a better game plan and ultimately won the game. I just get an intuitive feel that this is going to be close, and that for the reasons I've stated, like Ohio State's offensive performance against those 5 teams, Notre Dame's effectiveness as a pass defense, including in man coverage, and the fact that they're going to put pressure on Will Howard. I think Will Howard's going to have to win the game for him. Can they do it? Yes. Will they likely do it? Yes. But can Notre Dame win? I believe they can if the chips fall in their favor on the intangibles front, and I see a 20-17 victory for Notre Dame. But I may be apologizing after that game and saying how wrong I was, so we'll see.
We've all missed him, that's for sure.
Thanks for taking my call, Mark.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks.
And, of course, you can catch Adam on the Rutgers channel. Any of the channels you want to find here at the Voice of College Football, I believe one of the best ways would be just in the search bar on YouTube, just put in the Voice of College Football and that particular team channel may be able to lead you there. We've got most of those listed. I don't know where we stand in regards to, we can only list so many of them on the main channel page, but Adam does a great job covering Rutgers football and with a Tuesday night show on the Rutgers channel. Next up, we got, wow, I'm sure Rob's fired up right about now.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Good.
Yeah, so this is going to be a big game for both of these programs, more so for Notre Dame. But I was listening to a podcast earlier, and it brought up an interesting point. I know a lot of people are dogging Notre Dame for their semi-recent history, of bowl games and this and that. But I found it interesting that both teams since 1970 have the same amount of championships. Notre Dame has 3 and Ohio State has 3. Now, clearly, Ohio State has the more recent championships. And, fortunately, and you can call it lucky. I'm not going to call it lucky. I think it was good hiring practices. But Ohio State has found the guy to coach their teams. And Notre Dame decided to push Lou Holtz out the door and then went through the dark days of, I'm not going to go down that path. But, all these coaches that they had, Tyrone Willingham, blah, 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 blah. They just fell down this rabbit hole of they couldn't get out of their own way of just hiring terrible personnel to coach their teams. And I really feel like it started with Notre Dame pushing Lou Holtz out the door of just going into this dark spiral of just, mediocrity and sometimes worse than mediocrity. But now both of these programs are back in the championship, as I believe both programs really should be. They've gone about it different ways, right? Ohio State's recruited better recently. They have an amazing recruiting pipeline, I think, established. I mean, you could go back to Tressel, even before Tressel, but I think he's the one that really started to build that up even better. And then obviously Urban Meyer just kind of took it out and, exploded it. But I think both of these teams are where they should be. I'm excited for the future of these programs, especially obviously Notre Dame. And I feel like these two programs should be at the top of college football because, well, that's typically historically where they've been. So I think this is not only a team like Michigan's worst nightmare, where you have 2 of their worst rivals facing off against each other. So no matter who wins this game, it's not going to be a fun experience for Michigan, which is interesting. But I believe anybody watching this game is, I think it's an exciting game for a lot of people, unless you're from the SEC. You might not like it, but 2 years in a row. But yeah, super excited for this game and for a variety of reasons. But
one Michigan perspective I heard was that, and I believe this was our buddy Steve Dace said that if Michigan, from the Michigan perspective, they can't lose because if Ohio State beats Notre Dame, then they beat the national champion. And then if Notre Dame beats Ohio State, of course, they're just going to laugh at Ohio State not being able to complete the national championship.
Right. Yeah, that's one way you could look at it. But I like to look at it like somebody's going to win this game and it's going to be a rival of Michigan. So either way, I mean, they can say what they want, but it's going to sting. So
I'm enjoying all these people that are trying to discredit whoever wins this national championship, especially if it's Ohio State, because they've lost 2 games.
Well, isn't that so? Here's my point of view on this. I don't know that Notre Dame is the second best team in the country if we're being completely honest. Now, I'm not saying they're not, but I think they're in the top 4 clearly. It's hard to say who the pure number 2 team would be. I mean, obviously they're better. Like they beat Georgia, they beat the teams they needed to beat to get here, and both teams went through a fairly decent gauntlet to get to where they're at. I do think I would say I'd be okay with saying Notre Dame's the second best for this reason. No, they're not the most talented roster. We know this. But there's something to be said about a team that plays with a certain level of cohesion and a culture. When you got a lot of guys, especially young kids, that are believing in their head coach and believing that they can run through a wall for that guy, and it's not just Marcus Freeman. Let's give credit to all the coordinators involved in this game and all the coaches: Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, Jim Knowles, Mike Denbrock, Al Golden, all these guys. And it's no coincidence that I think the final 4 teams that were in the playoffs all have really good coordinators. I mean, you look at Koldenicki for Penn State. Now Tom Allen just went down to Clemson as he got poached away as a defensive coordinator for them. And then obviously Sarkisian. I mean, all these guys that were in the final 4 are experienced. I mean, maybe not Marcus Freeman as much as his 3rd year, but a lot of these guys have a lot of good experience and they have good coordinators. And Notre Dame is not just a talented team. They have talent. I'm kind of tired of this narrative. Oh, Notre Dame's got no talent. They're just scrappy and they have a lot of talent. They don't have as much as Ohio State, but who does? I mean, almost no one has as much talent as Ohio State. But they have talent, but more importantly, they have a culture that they have completely bought into. And I'm not saying that Ohio State doesn't. Actually, I was listening to an Ohio State podcast the other day, And I had an interesting. Well, I heard an interesting tidbit about the meeting that was called after the Michigan game was not like Ryan Day calling a meeting. It was the players calling the meeting to hash it out with the coach. And that's the fact that Ryan Day took it and he said, you know what? Yes, it's on me. You know, we made mistakes. We have to do better as coaches. We got to put the players in a better position. I think that's why you're seeing the turnaround, because now the players think, or they believe, that their coach now completely has their back and he's going to do everything he can to put those players in the right position. And that's why I think both of these teams are where they're at, because they had a bad moment in the season and they both bounced back spectacularly and haven't looked back since.
No, it's well said by you. There's a comment in the chat that basically, and I've heard this from a number of people, that Michigan is the reason why Ohio State's in the national championship game. We will never know. We have no idea. So nobody can emphatically state that Michigan is the cause for Ohio State being in the national championship game, because I certainly believed that Ohio State, if we go back to August, when I made my prediction, was going to beat Michigan and still win a national championship game. So both could have been done. Did it fuel the fire? Well, it certainly didn't hurt. Was it the cause? We'll never know. I believe Ohio State could have won these games without a loss to Michigan. I think you need a lot of things going in your direction to arrive at a national championship game. Yes, you've got to have top 10 minimum, top 10 talent in the country. So yes, absolutely, Notre Dame. For anyone watching, watch them cover, watch them rush the passer, stop the run. Look at those two backs coming out of the backfield, the tight end. Yes, they have exceptional talent. Where it's ranked in the nation, whether they're the third most talented team or the sixth most talented team, it's somewhere in that range. Do these teams have great character and teamwork? Of course. Football is the ultimate team sport. They've both been bludgeoned by injuries along the offensive fronts. And at this point, they have been the teams that have persevered and been able to figure out how to best game plan around those offensive line issues and also piece together an offensive line to put people in the best position to excel. And even leading into this game, Notre Dame has, if you heard our conversation with Brian Driscoll, that even with, I'm trying to think of particular players' names, but maybe Rocco Spindler is a person that they're still determining, and we're not going to know going into. No, I think it's Charles Jagusaw.
Yeah, Jagasaw will probably start. I think Spindler's going to be out.
But where Jagasaw starts is in question, whether he's going to be a tackle or a guard.
Right.
I'm just making the point, basically, that these teams have had to be flexible, and this is a byproduct of this playoff. The most talented probably will win, but definitely one of the most talented. I'm not talking about this specific game, but in this era of a 12-team playoff, it's going to be one of the most talented, but also the most perseverant, and the team that is able to adapt its personnel to the injury situation that they face.
And you know what's funny, Mark? That's the big key that you just talked about. If you'd have asked me at the beginning of the season, I really felt that Notre Dame had a really good team. Like, I thought we had a great team coming into the preseason. And then when you beat Texas A&M at Kyle Field by, multiple, scores, you feel pretty good. You feel even better about that. Of course, then NIU happens and the floor falls out from under you. But I really felt going into the year that with all the talent that we had coming back, I thought we had a really good shot. I didn't know, but I really thought we'd make the playoff. I thought we could make a run. I wouldn't have said we'd be in the championship game. I mean, I'm never like, oh, I'm not that kind of fan. I'm like, oh yeah, we're getting to the championship game. No, you gotta see how it plays out. But what's surprising to me is not so much that we're here; it's that we're here despite weathering all the injuries. Because typically, what's been Notre Dame's weakness in the past, right? You can play competitively with Clemson for a while there when they have Trevor Lawrence, and then you lose your star defensive back, and then boom, you're just getting slaughtered because they just pick on that one position. Like, that's been one of Notre Dame's biggest weaknesses in the past under the Brian Kelly era. They didn't have a lot of depth, and this Notre Dame team has depth. It's total next man up mentality where you get an injury and you just step up and you play and there's almost no drop off. I mean, you lose Benjamin Morrison, who was one of the best, if not the best, cornerback in the country. And then Leonard Moore steps in, and you're not really noticing a lot of drop off. Leonard Moore's played his tail off. He's setting himself up for a nice NFL career if he keeps going this way. So there's a lot of next man up mentality, and it's not just Notre Dame. Obviously, Ohio State's had to deal with their issues as well, especially on the offensive line. So I think the reason these teams, it's not just the fact that they're fighting for their coaches and they believe and they have a great culture, but these teams were able to weather the injury storm more so than, most other teams. And that's, I mean, and like you said, in a 12-team playoff, you're going to be playing so many more games. I mean, you're basically playing an NFL schedule now as a college team. You're playing the same amount of games as NFL teams. So you're asking your athletes to really, go through a gauntlet and just try to hope they come out unscathed. It's pretty interesting stuff, and I really can't wait for this game. I hope it's a good one. I'm not like Brian Driscoll or some of these other, and I've got nothing against Brian Driscoll, but I don't think Notre Dame's going to win. I hope they do. I think there's a path for them. I think they can win. I know they can win. I mean, if Michigan can win, if Nebraska can keep it close. I mean, you look at some of these teams that have been able to kind of stymie Ohio State a little bit. They're typically a little bit more defensive teams, right? I think Notre Dame can win, obviously. I don't think they're going to. I think Ohio State's kind of turned the corner. And when a team that has that much talent is playing at the peak of what they're able to do, it's going to be hard to beat. They're going to be hard to beat. So I'd love to eat crow and say, come back here after the game and say, oh, I was wrong. Notre Dame won. That's great. I just don't see it. And I hate to say it as a Notre Dame fan, but I'm still going to watch the game. I'm going to hang out at a bar with my brother and some friends, and we're going to have a good time and watch the game, win or lose. It's going to be fun.
Right, Rob. Anything else?
No, Mark. Well, I would just say, may the best team win, and hopefully let's have a good championship game.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thanks for calling, man.
Yep, no problem.
Yeah, we're sitting here on a Saturday night. Of course, we are just about 48 hours away from the national championship game in Atlanta. Ohio State taking on Notre Dame. And as Rob was talking about, and we were basically running through the components of a national championship season and teams that make it to this game. And it's being even emphasized in this 12-team playoff era. It's about talent, and then it's about who's hot. It's about injuries, and even more so, the ability to adapt to the injuries, to have great depth, to have players that are ready to step in. And then when it comes to the offensive line is different than every other position. Two most important positions on the field, in my estimation: quarterback, offensive line. As a unit, the offensive line, which may even as a unit, 5 players, be more important than the quarterback. That's the one position. Sure, you have this at linebacker. You have this in the secondary. The secondary would be the second position to offensive line that you would have this type of coaching impact, where they need to determine who fits where in regards to not just the best 4 in the secondary or the best 5 or 6 when it's nickel or dime, but who plays where. And it's the same, and even more so. And I think it's the most complex unit to deal with and to coach, to develop. That's why most great offensive lines, they may have the 5-star, the Kelvin Banks or somebody of that ilk, but mostly there are players that needed to be developed. Even if they were high 4 stars or 5 stars, they had to be in the program for a couple of years, because the weight, the conditioning, and the skill set development. We think of skill players as being the guys with the real skill, the guys that handle the football. But how many running backs and wide receivers come into college football and take off immediately? Quite a few compared to offensive linemen. That's the skill development position. And so that's a skill position that needs to be developed. And of course, again, the strength and conditioning. My point being, then the coach has to determine who gets placed where. And we see the better offensive lines in college football have players who are able to play multiple positions. And that's what we've seen in this playoff. And then talent, how hot the team is, injuries, ability to adapt. And then I'll say the last category is something that we saw in this playoff. That's the rankings, the seedings, the format of the tournament, just like the NCAA basketball tournament. Had Penn State matched up against Ohio State at the same time that Oregon did, if that was Penn State and not Oregon, well, Penn State would have been out of the playoff at that point, and Oregon might have been churning along merrily and met Notre Dame. And who knows, we might have an Ohio State-Oregon national championship game if the seeding was different. All right. We've got Nick checking in here at the Voice of College Football. Nick, what's going on?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm good.
I just wanted to say to start real quick, I am so excited as a Michigan fan to watch this game. It's clearly a game of Cinderellas, right? I mean, look at the seeds, right? Isn't it the 7th versus the 8th seed?
Yes.
After the 7th and 8th? Okay, so yeah, that's
really consider Ohio State to be a Cinderella team?
No, that's sarcasm. But anyway, so first of all, I noticed you said quarterback and offensive line. You said you think are the two most important positions.
Yes.
And I disagree a little bit, but could you just kind of summarize? Like, obviously, we all know quarterback, but more along the offensive line. Where I heard you kind of talking about it and cut out a little bit for me. But yeah, could you just kind of summarize your offensive line analysis again?
Well, the offensive line analysis is not each singular individual offensive lineman. I'm not talking about each individual player, any one of them being the second most important player, but as a unit, that is the second most important position. Number one, just from a numbers standpoint, you're talking about 5 players on the field of the offense. So that would outnumber a running back, a wide receiver, a defensive back, a shutdown corner, an edge rusher. We're talking about 5 players. And then we're talking about the unit that protects the quarterback, the most important player. We are talking about the unit that makes everything else on the offense go. We've all seen teams that had decent running backs, decent wide receivers, stout offensive line play. We've all seen teams that had great skill position players and bad offensive lines. I heard a NFL general manager one time say when he's looking at the next season, he's in the offseason looking who's going to be good next season. He looks at the quarterback and he looks at who has an offensive line that's returning that was a good offensive line from the previous season. Yeah, I will stand by that comment forever. Yes. They're protecting the most important player. All right. Don't know what happened to Nick there, but welcome into the Voice of College Football. We got our buddy Dave stopping by.
Yes. It's great, Mark Rogers. Just want to talk a little bit about this game. I'm going to get into what I think about it, but just for a little historical context, correct me if I'm wrong, but Notre Dame has had a string of where coaches in their 3rd year have won national championships, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
I know that's Lou Holtz, that's Ara Parsegan, and I believe Dan Devine's first year was 1975. So yeah, 75, 76, 77. Yes, that's 3 straight at least.
Yeah. Right. I don't know if Leahy was like that or
coaches ago. Bob Davie certainly didn't. Right. Or Ty Willingham or Charlie Weiss.
Charlie Weiss, yeah, right. Yeah, it didn't work out well for the last 4, I would say. Yes. That's for sure. But just for historical purposes, I would also say, it's interesting. Before I kind of get to this game, they've had a 6-game losing streak against Ohio State, but I will say Notre Dame has had the unfortunate or unenviable task of, and I was ranking the best rosters I've ever seen at Ohio State with a friend of mine, probably a few months back. And if you think about it, Mark, 1995, 1996, 05, and 2015 are probably 4 of the top 6 or 7 rosters I've seen at Ohio State since I started watching Ohio State football in 1986. So they have had kind of the unenviable task of facing some really great Ohio State teams for those 6 losses.
Very true.
So
yeah.
I don't know if anybody's mentioned that, but
none of the games up until that final one were particularly nail biters.
Yeah, they kind of controlled them. I remember the Fiesta Bowl. They kind of controlled that game. Notre Dame kept it kind of semi-competitive. By the way, a test case for sitting out bowl games might have been that Smith injury, the linebacker for Notre Dame in that game, by the way.
I brought up Jalen Smith a couple of weeks ago when we were bantering back and forth about bowl games and sitting out, but it turned out for him.
Yeah, it did.
In the long run.
It did. By the way, one of Kelly's more talented teams was, I mentioned that being an all-time Ohio State talented team. That was maybe Kelly's most talented team, maybe even more talented than his playoff teams.
They came within a final drive of beating Stanford to go to the playoff.
Yeah, they kicked a last-second field goal, I think, to beat him. I watched that game in Palo Alto. Yeah, that was the Christian McCaffrey team that dusted Iowa in the Rose Bowl that year.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, some thoughts on this game. I certainly go into this game with a certain amount of confidence, but I will say, you had mentioned something earlier. I'm kind of happy that Ohio State had a game like they had with Texas coming into this game, which ended up being, basically a 4-quarter game. I know cosmetically it actually ended up being a 2-touchdown game. But if Sawyer, by the way, the play doesn't look as great if Sawyer doesn't return it for a touchdown. But if Sawyer just falls on it and we run out the clock, it's really a 21-14 game. Know. So,
let's see. I covered the spread anyway with my pick, so I was good either way. But actually, technically, that was the better play to make. Would have been for him to slide and maybe take it down to the 1-yard line and keep it right. Well, not the 1-yard line, but anyway, it didn't matter. But
yeah. I'm just saying theoretically, if he slipped up or if there was a Texas player to get him down there, it would have been, it would essentially kind of ended up just being a 1-possession game. Although it's nice to say you've won all these games by 2 possessions or more, but on top of that, if you think about it, it really was a 4th-quarter game to the last, because that play happened, 2.5 minutes left or something like that, I think. So, I think that the one thing I must say, though, and one of the reasons that I think this game could be competitive, and one of the reasons I thought the first 2 games were blowouts was, and going back and watching a few Tennessee games, I had said going into that game, I thought that Ohio State could throw the ball against Tennessee's secondary. I did think their D-line was really good. I knew Pierce was a good edge rusher, but I thought it said something that Beck had his best day throwing the ball against that defense when he was lousy the entire year. And then I looked at the Oregon game, and I thought that Oregon's secondary was also susceptible because remember, Howard's 2 best games of the year had were Tennessee, which was the previous game, and then at Oregon early in the year, his 2 best statistical games of the year. So I felt confident we were going to throw the ball well against Oregon. Now, bottom line, Texas has a much better secondary, I believe, than Oregon or Tennessee. Yeah. And remember what I said to you? We had said after the game, who are the 2 best secondaries maybe in the country? We had said possibly, Texas or Notre Dame, right, Mark? So I find it interesting. I know that they're saying that Notre Dame's going to play. I've heard they're going to play a ton of man, but then I've heard that's also a misnomer that they've talked to some of their coaches and say, what do you think, we're crazy? We're just going to sit and man the entire game. I'd be real surprised if Al Golden doesn't switch up coverages. maybe even, double Jeremiah, maybe shade that safety over, because you can play man and just double a guy, and shade a safety over. But I mean, I think the one thing I would say is if their secondary can hang in there and prevent big plays and keep the Ohio State receivers in front of them and make them go 20-20, then I think it could keep the game interesting. The one thing I wonder if Notre Dame can do, and I think this game might be a little bit more interesting if Mills, their best defensive lineman, wasn't hurt. I do think Cross is a really good player on that D line, but I just wonder how Notre Dame's going to generate a really good pass rush in this game. Is Golden going to come up with some blitzes? Because I'm wondering if their front four is as dangerous as getting a pass rush, considering that their best D lineman and maybe their best pass rusher is not playing in the game.
Well, there's no one particular player along that defensive front that scares you as an All-American, but they've got a great rotation and they're all really good players and athletic, and they keep those guys fresh. They are playing a lot of players, even with Riley Mills on the bench, unfortunately for them, because he was the best playmaker. The stat sheet shows that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Ohio State's offensive line has been remarkable in pass protection. I continue to be astounded, although I would say that as the game wore on against Texas, the Texas rush did become more and more effective in the second half.
Well, yeah, exactly. Their D-line played a really good third quarter. You look at like the last couple of drives of that third quarter, they shut Ohio State down. I mean, their D-line started to get pressure. They ran some good blitzes, that they got a pass rush on Howard late in that third quarter. And, I just wonder if Golden is going to try to emulate some of those blitzes to get after Ohio State. And then I just wonder how much man they're going to play in this game, because, you better have some really good corners to think if you're going to play man the whole day and not give up some plays on that back end.
Even if they're confident, and obviously they're a man-to-man team, that's how they play defense. That's how they play coverage. That's their so you don't want to completely change up what got you there, but at the same time, I just think that's foolish for a couple different reasons. Number one, I don't think you can survive like that play to play for an entire 60-minute game against those receivers. And number two, the offensive minds on the other side, just if they see the same coverage for an entire football game, you have to switch up coverages, just like you have to switch up blitz looks and looks up front. There's just nobody who can play a base defense anymore in a game that's this competitive against these kind of skill position players.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, as I've said on numerous occasions, even if they choose to basically build a fort around Jeremiah Smith, remember, Ohio State has an option B, C, and maybe even D. They do throw the ball to the tight end, and they can utilize their backs in the passing game. So, it's just not, let's go that route, essentially build a fort around him. And then, if you do force them to go to their other targets, as Texas did to a certain extent, we still have guys who can get open and make plays.
Although Jeremiah Smith taken out of the game by Texas, Emeka Egbuka didn't go off. Had a very pedestrian game. Cornell Tate had a good game for him. And, he's dropped a pass from here and there throughout the season. So hopefully if he's going to be a target 10 or 12 times, like might be the case, let's just not see, a 1 or 2 drop game out of Cornell Tate. And I've got confidence in Cornell Tate, and he's a really good player, and he's emerged as many of us expected this year, but he has dropped a few key passes this season.
Yeah. I think that obviously that slant to start that first drive, although they ended up scoring a touchdown on the drive, he should have definitely caught the pass, and that should have been a touchdown, on the first drive against Texas. I do think, the thing that I come back to is, even if, and this is my issue with Notre Dame, I just wonder how they score points in this game unless they get turnovers or special teams. Because the one thing is, I think the Ohio State defensive line is playing that good. And especially if that Notre Dame offensive line has some injuries, with the way the Ohio State edge rushers have been getting home the last few games, I think what they're going to have to do is probably throw the ball to the tight end, incorporate their backs in the passing game the same way Texas did against Ohio State, and try to work, a kind of a short passing game and run their quarterback. I think that that's probably their best offensive strategy, because I just don't know how they generate chunk passing plays in this game.
Chunk passing game. No, I don't see it. I don't think that they're going to get a double fall down like they did when Jaden Greathouse got that 55-yard touchdown. By the way, Cam Miller, who was guarding Jaden Greathouse, just transferred to Rutgers just like in the last 24 hours. I found that interesting. Notre Dame, Bo Collins may be back for this game, and he was arguably their best receiver this year, and he missed the Penn State game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that there was some things that they might have been able to take advantage against Penn State's secondary, by the way, because even though I think Penn State is really good up front, I thought that, there are some things you can go after Penn State on, in the back end, against their pass defense. And Leonard was able to hit some big throws, threw the ball a lot better than I thought he would. That's the one thing is I would think for them to get into the 20s even in this game, I would think they're going to need special teams or turnovers, Mark. I mean, could you see them driving the ball for 3 touchdowns against Ohio State's defense? To me, I think that's going to be very tough for them to do.
Well, I will say this. I generally agree with you. However, Michigan and especially Oregon did establish a running game against Ohio State. Jordan James had a decent game against the Buckeyes. What did he run for? Like 120?
Right. But remember, they also had the threat of the pass, Mark, with Gabriel. They had the threat of the pass. I would also say that the one thing that happened in the game was the running game kind of broke late for them, I think, a little bit in that game. Sure. Mullings broke that run late, where I think the Ohio State defense was pretty much gassed towards that last drive because their offense was, kept either turning it over, missing field goals, or having moronic play calling. Not that I want to dredge that up again, but.
Yes, more of the latter than anything else.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But I you know what? Listen, they've held Ohio State to 17 points, 21 points the last couple times they played them. I do think this is a better offense, certainly than last year. But again, that first game, that was the first game of the 22 season, but they held that Stroud offense to 21 points that year. Although, what's interesting about that game, that was the game where Jackson Smith and Jigba got hurt to start that game.
Yeah.
That's which
right.
I think they probably had a lot of plays designed for him to start that game, which I always say is going to be one of the great what ifs of all time with the 22 team is what would that offense have looked like with Njigba, Harrison, and Igbuka for an entire season that year?
Not even for an entire season, for the fourth quarter against Georgia.
Well, yeah. Well, maybe they're the number 1 seed, and maybe it's totally different anyway if they have all 3 of those receivers for an entire season.
Yeah.
But, I think that I could see this game definitely being a game into the fourth quarter where Ohio State maybe scores late. I mean, my early feel is 24-13, maybe 27-13, somewhere in that neighborhood. I think Notre Dame's defense is going to make Ohio State work for it. I do. But if Ohio, here's the tough part though for Notre Dame. If Notre Dame falls behind early, like 10-0, 14-3, something like that, that's when it could get real bad.
Sure, for obvious reasons, puts pressure on Leonard to throw the ball. Yep. Sawyer, JTT pin their ears back, and all of that. And Notre Dame in no way is designed to do that. But Notre Dame in that situation would have to stay awfully patient because there's no reason to panic if it's 14-3 in the second quarter. You can still run the ball and run your offense. But obviously, yeah, you're in difficult territory because if the Ohio State offense continues to score points, then you're going to be taken out of that at some point.
Yeah. Then you get out of your element. You get away from your run game. Possibly that defensive line pins its ears back, and you could be in bad shape at that particular point. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, Mark. I'm very optimistic, but I can't wait for it to get here. I think it's going to be fun. Hey, did you ever think about going back? I really thought it was cool. You did the cast 2 years ago for the 2 playoff games.
I did.
Yeah.
And like 20,000 people watched those videos.
Yeah.
However, I did that. I don't know. I think I did 2 separate. Yeah, I did 2 separate for each game. You know what happened?
What?
Is I had my mic set up and I thought I can keep the audio low
Right.
on those games and it's not going to leak or bleed into, because this is a directional mic. It's supposed to just catch this. But anyway, long story short is YouTube took down those videos for being for there being copyright, because the game broadcast bled onto, and probably more so the commercials bled into the mic, and they took those videos down.
Oh, is that why we can't do those, like what we did with the 2019 Ohio State Clemson game?
That out, that because I thought we would be able to be fine with that, because that was not being broadcast on YouTube.
Right. Hey, I've been waiting here.
We'll figure it out.
I was waiting. Team Up North fans wanted to join with me and replay the spot game. I would be happy to do so.
I would love to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I know you had 45 Miami channels for a while, Mark. We were going to do the title game. I would be happy to make their acquaintance and review that game.
Yeah. I just can't get the dreaded letter from YouTube that I got a dreaded strike against me, and I only have 1 or 2 left. I just can't risk that. So I got to figure out how to get around that.
Well, I mean, once you get your book sales up, Mark, I mean, that.
Sure. I'll just be an author, I'm sure.
Yeah, there you go. You got to think about that. Like I told you the other day, are you thinking about doing like a big bookstore thing? Where
would I do it? That's the if I wrote a book about the Buckeyes, let's say, if I wrote simply an Ohio State book, then I would just land in Columbus somewhere and do a Barnes and Noble in Columbus. But this is a national book. There's nowhere I can go, and I can't do a book tour.
Hey, I would be the first one at that Barnes and Noble. I would have my coffee. I would have my scone. I would be there for you, brother. I want you to know that.
I appreciate that, David. That would be great. And I heard you make mention of that the other night. But there's just no way to arrange that for a national, unless I was funded out the wazoo and I could be all over the place. That would be phenomenal. But yes, so David's talking about this book right here, Disputed National Champions. Please pick it up. The link's in the description section of this video. It's only $9.99.
There we go.
Except for those of you who would like it signed and just contact me, because I just
is it that much more?
Load of them.
Is it that much more for that Mark Rogers autographed signed copy, Mark?
Well, the autograph's worth nothing, so I'm not charging for the autograph. But I had to have, so people are obviously ordering these direct, so I had to have a box shipped here. So the shipping for that, and then the shipping to ship the book to everyone. So I'm guesstimating about 20.
There we go. Well, time to watch some playoff football, my friend. You're going to go live
tonight.
Well, we got Lions in Washington tonight. Could be an interesting one.
Okay, maybe
probably high scoring game. I think we could see some points in this one. 2 good offenses.
I'm about to correct somebody, meaning Wet Blanket's comment down here. It's been annoying me, not because I don't like Wet Blanket. He's a great viewer and so forth, but anytime I see misinformation, I just like to jump on it. So that's why that NFL comment has been on the banner. But I did not watch any. I didn't even know it was the NFL playoffs today until I saw people tweeting about the Texans and the Chiefs. So maybe I'll check out the game tonight.
Oh, I felt it, Mark. I took the Texans minus the 8.5, and it was 23-12. They were kicking a field goal to make it 23-15. They get it blocked. Then they give up a safety to make it 23-14 and rub it in.
Oh,
how's that? How's that?
Brutal.
Rough one, my friend.
Yeah,
all right.
It is.
So Monday after the game, you're going to go live again. That's right.
Monday after the game, and probably sometime on Monday, we'll pop up to get some last thoughts in.
Okay. Well, I'm hoping to be here to celebrate with the voice of college football.
There you go. Thank you so much, David.
Take care, Mark. Have a good one.
Appreciate it. Yes. Disputed national champions. It's a historical reset of the 1990s. Give it a look. It's in the description section. It's not just a history book, folks. We've taken all the results of every season in the 1990s, and we have sliced and diced those as they pertain to what happened in those particular years. But much more than that, we have taken all the results of those seasons and placed them in the BCS formula, the 4-team college football playoff formula, the 12-team formula, and even the proposed 14-team formula. College football junkies, that's all we have here. Watching. You've got to be a junkie to be watching. You'll love this book. And the link's in the description section. Every Tuesday, starting with this Tuesday coming up, Leanne Herring and myself on the move. It's our transfer portal and recruiting update that is going to be new and improved with guests and all sorts of great topics and all sorts of not just guests, but player and coaches interviews as well. We are going to give the recruiting front and transfer portal, a lot of attention here at the Voice of College Football, but you can catch that show, the Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time show, over on the recruiting channel. I did want to mention as well, you may have noticed that the ticker at the bottom of the screen is our members, a list of our members that we appreciate. So I need to do a better job, and have in recent weeks, of promoting and recognizing our members, both on Patreon and on YouTube. So please sign up on Patreon or on YouTube for our memberships. And what we are going to do here in the next, let's make it through the championship game, of course, on Monday night. And then the top 25 that actually makes sense comes out the next day. And all sorts of off-season content will then ensue, like transfer portal rankings and schedule previews and a way too early top 25. I've been working on my bottom 10 for 2024. Also, the conference rankings are coming out. The Big 12's been released. The ACC I'm working on. And just to give you a quick tease on our ACC power rankings, my opening line, because I just recorded it right before we started this live stream, was the ACC sucks. And then we go from there and do the ACC power rankings. Also, one other thing, as we go into the off season, I know that we've been inconsistent with our live streams and call-in shows. Maybe over the last couple of years, you got to take into consideration, I host the Florida State show, the Miami show, used to do the USC show until recently, the Michigan show, the Ohio State show, the Oklahoma show, all these shows that we do, the Iowa show, used to do the Nebraska show until about a year ago. That with all those shows, it's been difficult to count on me here. But going into this offseason, I want to nail down at least 2 time slots per week, whether that's a Tuesday night, Thursday night. You can certainly leave your comments and questions in regards to what would be the best days and times for us to show up for a call-in show on a regular basis. We're going to release our off-season schedule here after the national championship game. All right. Nick's back. Let's see if we can keep Nick connected.
Hey, Mark.
Hello, sir.
Hey, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, somebody called me. For some reason, when I get into StreamYard, I'm doing it through the browser, not the app. Maybe I should do it through the app. But when someone calls me, it just, I don't know, my audio cuts out and it just turns into a mess. So that's
no
my
worries.
bad. Okay. Yeah, I won't take up too much of your time. Yeah, I guess I disagree a little bit. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. I think more specifically, and this has been mentioned by other people, but in this instance, I lean more towards an elite defensive line. I think that's, now obviously, if you have a terrible offensive line, that's one thing. But I think you can win a championship with a solid quarterback, just a good offensive line, but you still need that elite defensive line, or better yet, front seven, or at least a front seven that doesn't have any obvious weaknesses. I don't know, when you're looking at the trend in this tournament, teams with the best defenses are the ones who advance overwhelmingly. And then there's also evidence of this last year with Michigan. JJ is definitely better than a solid quarterback, but his production was obviously like not elite because of how Michigan played the game offensively. And Michigan just had a good offensive line. Michigan's pass blocking grade last year was the worst of their 3-year run in the playoffs. And they still won a title. So now they were very deep, probably deeper than the average team. So there's that. Maybe that factored in more. But I think it's just pretty much overwhelming at this point. Whoever has the better defense is presumably going to win, especially if they are elite. Which you can make the case, both of these defenses. Well, I guess I'll ask you, do you think both of these defenses are in that elite tier or kind of hovering up there?
Well, I thought that the 4 best defenses in the country were playing in the semifinals. So if you're talking about this particular season, I think that Ohio, it's difficult for me to separate the 4 defenses that played in the semifinals. If I was going to start to separate them, I would put Penn State 4. But the other 3, it's difficult for me to separate. I would tend to believe, and we'll see what we witness on Monday night, that Ohio State and Texas's defenses are the 2 best. But again, I was not even separating the 4 going into the semifinals.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on this game. I do kind of have a general feeling. I think a lot of people feel this way, that it's going to be a tight game, but I don't really have much to base that off of. So, I think Ohio State's going to win in a blowout. My score prediction would be about Ohio State 42, Notre Dame 17. Mainly the reason why I think that is because Notre Dame is going to be tasked with winning the trenches battle against Ohio State. And I think they'll likely have to win the turnover margin too to actually win the game. But I don't see how they win that trenches battle when they have an undersized defensive interior, and their best defensive lineman, I think, is still out for this game. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Well, yeah, I've also heard like many people just, I don't know, kind of risibly bloviating a bit about Notre Dame using Michigan's blueprint to beat Ohio State. That kind of seems a little, I don't know. I don't see the direct logic there. The blueprint is basically, for Michigan, having a Mason Graham and a Kenneth Grant, along with NFL edge rushers. I mean, does Notre Dame have that? I don't think so. So, I mean,
I don't know that they're too far off. They have one of the best defensive fronts in the country.
Yeah, but there isn't their best player. Yeah, you just said their best player's out. So I think that's pretty significant. And like I said, they're still undersized. So we'll see. I mean, Ohio State's offensive line isn't great, but I definitely think they're gelling, coming together pretty quick. So that could be pretty difficult for them. And then obviously we all know, or maybe you disagree with this, but I'm assuming you would agree with Notre Dame not being built to pass their way back into a game if Ohio State gets a lead early.
Notre Dame is probably the least equipped team of almost any playoff team to pass their way back.
And they're predominantly a man defense scheme. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah, I think that's a death sentence if they try to do that, which they'll probably try to mix different coverages. And you know how it goes. I mean, for me, I always have a caveat of if Will Howard or Riley Leonard, if one of them gets hit and hit hard, gets their bell rung early in the game, look out. That's the team in that scenario who I'd definitely pick to lose, just because those dudes' passing percentages just skyrocket, or not skyrocket, just go down very quickly.
Yeah.
When that happens. So, yeah, like I said, I guess overall I just see too many ways Ohio State can win this. And it just seems to me Notre Dame has that feeling of a team that's, fought nobly, but I think they're running out of gas. And Ohio State's going to wipe the floor with them, unless obviously, turnovers get way out of hand. But I don't think that's something we can really predict, so.
Notre Dame does create the most turnovers in the country. They are number one in not turnover margin, but they're number one defensively enforcing turnovers.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it depends on the turnover, a pick six is a lot different than a recovered fumble in your own territory, your own territory. So I don't know that I try to stay away from that a little bit just because to me there's a lot of variance. But like I said, I don't know. Is there anything you disagree with that, or did you want to add on to anything? Or
I will say that while we're staying with the kind of periphery categories, turnovers, if you look at special teams, Ohio State, I don't know that they've restored their faith in Jaden Fielding, their field goal kicker, after he missed 2 against Michigan. I believe he's 4 out of 6 in the playoffs. One of those was a 56-yarder. While Notre Dame, their kicker was injured, and so his stats don't look good because he missed a lot of kicks early in the season, but he was almost perfect at South Carolina before he transferred, and he's been really good in the playoffs. So Notre Dame may have that slight advantage. Plus, of course, can't think of the kid's name, but returned a kickoff for a touchdown to open the second half against Georgia, and that wasn't necessarily a fluke. He's returned kicks for touchdowns before, and it's one of the better averages in the nation. So that's one of those fluky things to me, because you can't count on a kick return touchdown, because teams at the very most get 3 of those in a season, and that's extraordinary. Usually 2 is the top of the nation. So to count on anything affecting the scoreboard from a kick return standpoint but if it does, then most likely that's going to be Notre Dame doing that. Although Caleb Downs did have a punt return touchdown against Indiana this year.
Okay. All right.
I don't know. The last thing I'll say, when you're asking for me to counter punch on anything that you said, I don't know that Ohio State's the team from an offensive line or running back standpoint to take advantage of an undersized Notre Dame front.
Yeah, I could see that popping up and being kind of interesting. But like I said, from what I've seen, it does seem like Ohio State's offensive line is gelling right now. So
sure.
Yeah, I can't say that I know exactly how undersized Notre Dame is, but I will tell you, and Notre Dame obviously has a better offense than Michigan does, but if Michigan loses one of their starters from their defensive line, they likely don't win against Ohio State. So that can be really tough to overcome, especially if it's, your best player on that side of the ball, or one of your best players.
That's a great point. And you make a great point about the defensive front. Now, when you started to expand that out to the front 7 and the secondary, obviously I was just talking about one position unit. So I'm not trying to match up an offensive line versus a front 7. Then that tips the scales, definitely. But I totally get your point. If we look at Michigan's front from last year, if we look at the 2 teams playing on Monday night, especially Ohio State, I think their defensive line has been incredible. It's been good all year, but it's getting better. It's been playing its best games in the playoffs. And of course, the great Alabama defensive fronts, the Clemson great defensive front that they had in 2018. So I totally get your point. And that was always my adage watching the NFL, that to rush the passer was the most important thing, and to have the push in the middle, but more so the edge rushers to get to the quarterback. Just look at NFL history. The steel curtain, doomsday defense, front 4s have been, game wreckers.
When you can push the interior of the pocket up into the quarterback's lap and almost force him to roll out to 2 very talented rushers screaming off the edge, good luck. There's not a lot you could do in that scenario. Now, I will also say, while I did pick Ohio State 42-17, that's obviously with the caveat that Ohio State does not revert back to their floor. It's interesting to me this could blow up my entire prediction. And I think there's a real chance we end up with a really sloppy game. Both of these teams have pretty low floors. Now, maybe I'm kind of expecting they're both past that, so like their floor isn't that low anymore. But we've seen earlier this year that duds, like terrible performances, are in these teams, and I can't think of a national championship where both, at least recently, both teams had this low of a floor. I mean, losing to a 7-5 Michigan team whose offense is just, horrible this year, and Notre Dame losing to Northern. That one's still a head scratcher. But like I said, with these teams getting this far, I think that's probably in the rearview mirror, and that's what I'm banking on. But all bets are off if both of them lay a dud, because that could be a pretty ugly performance. So
yeah, the Washington team last year did not lose any games going into the national championship game, but they had some pretty poor performances against Arizona State, Arizona, a few other teams in the Pac-12 that weren't too pretty, but they didn't lose the games.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting. I really, like I said before, I'd say my score prediction, I'm maybe like a 6.5 out of 10 confidence wise in. So there's definitely, like, I wouldn't be shocked if it's a close game. I'm just trying to think more with my head. I'm trying to look at the ways Ohio State can win this game and Notre Dame. And I just kind of get the sense that Notre Dame is running out of gas a little bit, and Ohio State seems to just be, I don't know, they're on a roll. I mean, I know it was a closer game against Texas, but it still never felt to me that Texas was actually going to win the game. I thought it was more of a thing of Ohio State kind of shooting themselves in the foot. Like, for example, Travion Henderson not punching, but kind of slapping that guy in the face. Stuff like that kind of drive killers. Texas, I mean, they didn't have anything to do with that. And if you even just get one of those drives for an additional touchdown, they probably run away with the game. So
I'm with you.
All righty. Well, thanks for taking my call, Mark.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.
Good stuff. We appreciate the contributions here at the Voice of College Football. I kind of ran out running through all of them tonight. But thanks for being here. And we may or may not show up on Sunday or Monday, but we will be here for sure after the game. Check out the content right here at the Voice of College Football. We appreciate all of you. Thank you for the members that you see scrolling by, both on Patreon and here on YouTube. So please grab yourself a membership. And here in the next 2 weeks, we'll call it 2 weeks, hold me to that, we will have a live stream with probably with everyone, because we want to talk about what you guys would like to see as members here at the Voice of College Football. Enjoy your Saturday.